At 11:47 a.m. on November 29, 1943, 20,000 feet above the industrial city of Bremen, Staff Sergeant Eugene Paul Moran crouched inside the narrow tail section of a B-17F flying fortress called Rikki Tikki Tavi. The aircraft vibrated violently as German anti-aircraft fire tore through the sky around him. Explosions blossomed in black clouds, slamming shards of steel into aluminum skin. Moran was 19 years old. He was flying his 5th combat mission with the 8th Air Force's 96th Bomb Group. Barely old enough to vote, he was already a veteran by wartime standards. His position as tail gunner placed him at the very back of the aircraft, isolated from the rest of the crew, separated by a long, narrow crawlway that no one could pass through during combat. The mission had begun 4 hours earlier at RAF Snetterton Heath in England. Before dawn, 346 B-17 bombers had lumbered into the air, one after another, engines roaring, bound for Bremen's factories and shipyards. The city was one of the most heavily defended targets in Germany. In the previous month alone, Bremen's flak batteries had destroyed 64 American bombers. Moran's own squadron had already buried 11 tail gunners since September. As the bomber stream crossed the German coast at 23,000 feet, the formation tightened. The air was thin, brutally cold, and silent except for the constant vibration of engines. Frost formed inside the aircraft, oxygen masks fogged with every breath. From his position, Moran had the widest view of the sky. He scanned constantly, swiveling his twin .50 caliber Browning machine guns, watching the empty blue behind the formation. The tail position was both a warning system and a death sentence. Fighters attacked from the rear first, and tail gunners were usually the first to die. There was no one to talk to. The intercom crackled occasionally, but mostly he listened to his own breathing and the mechanical hum of the guns. If something went wrong back here, no one could reach him. He was on his own. The first attack came without warning. Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighters dove from above the formation, cannons flashing. Moran spotted one closing fast from 6 o'clock, its nose pointed directly at him. Training took over. He squeezed both triggers. The guns roared. Spent brass poured onto the floor, clattering around his boots. Tracer rounds streaked through the sky. The German fighter rolled violently, trailing smoke, and peeled away. There was no time to celebrate. Moments later, black bursts of flak exploded across the formation. Each shell burst hurled thousands of steel fragments outward at nearly 3,000 feet per second. The bomber shook as if struck by a giant fist. Then the intercom went dead. Moran glanced forward through his tail window and felt his stomach drop. Rikki Tikki Tavi was sliding backward out of formation. They were alone. German fighters swarmed the isolated bomber. Cannon rounds ripped into the fuselage from every angle. Moran fired continuously, tracking targets as they flashed past, but there were too many of them. Then a massive explosion tore through the aircraft. The nose section vanished in flame. The bombardier, navigator, pilot, co-pilot, and flight engineer were gone instantly, erased in a fraction of a second. Another shell tore through the radio compartment, killing 3 more men in the waist section. 8 of the 9 other crewmen were dead. Only Moran and the navigator remained alive. The navigator crawled forward, clipped on his parachute, and jumped. Moran reached for his own chute. It was destroyed. Bullet holes riddled the silk canopy. The harness straps were torn. It would never open. He had no escape. Then came the hit that changed everything. A direct flak burst severed the tail section from the rest of the bomber. The explosion was deafening. The entire tail assembly tore loose. Moran felt a violent lurch as gravity seized him. The fuselage vanished above him, disappearing in smoke and fire. He was falling, still inside the tail, 20,000 feet above Germany, with no parachute. But something strange happened. The tail didn't drop straight down. The vertical and horizontal stabilizers acted like crude wings. The section began to glide, spinning slowly through the freezing air. Moran clutched his gun handles, pressed against the bulkhead by centrifugal force. There was no training for this, no survival manual, no instructions. Through the shattered window, Moran saw German fighters circling. They assumed everyone was dead. They were wrong. His gun still worked. As one fighter swooped closer, Moran aimed and fired. Tracer rounds arced across the sky. The German pilot banked sharply away, stunned that a severed tail section was shooting back. The tail continued its bizarre descent, spinning and gliding downward, the wind screaming through torn metal. German flak crews on the ground spotted the falling wreckage and opened fire. Moran was being shot at from above and below, while falling inside a broken aircraft. The altimeter needle still moved, 19,000 feet, 18,000. Moran's head slammed into the gun sight. Blood poured into his eyes. His ribs cracked against the gun mounts, but he refused to let go. 16,000, 15,000. Fields and forests began to take shape below. 14,000, 13,000. He tried the escape hatch. It wouldn't move. The frame had warped. He was trapped. 10,000, 9,000. The spinning crushed him against the bulkhead. The pressure burst his eardrums. Dental fillings popped loose. 8,000, 7,000. The glide flattened slightly. The stabilizers were doing something. 6,000, 5,000. No way to steer, no way to slow down. 4,000, 3,000. Individual pine trees were now visible, their branches reaching upward like dark claws. 2,000, 1,000. The tail section slammed into the tops of the trees. Branches snapped, wood exploded, aluminum screamed. The vertical stabilizer caught a thick trunk and pivoted violently, tearing away speed. The tail cartwheeled through the canopy, shedding metal and debris before crashing into the forest floor. Moran's skull cracked against the gun sight. Both forearms shattered. His ribs broke completely. Pain exploded through his body, but he was alive. Blood flooded his eyes. His arms wouldn't move. His chest burned with every breath. Then he heard voices, German voices, footsteps crunching through leaves. 2 men emerged, but they were not soldiers. They were Serbian prisoners of war, forced laborers. Both were doctors, captured years earlier and pressed into German service. They expected to find a corpse. Instead, they found a boy barely breathing. With no equipment and no medicine, they worked fast, binding his arms with strips torn from their own clothes, pressing on his head wound to slow the bleeding. German soldiers arrived moments later. When they saw Moran, they lowered their rifles. This man was no threat. Moran was carried to a military hospital in Bremen, the same city he had been sent to bomb. German doctors examined him and shook their heads. Crushed skull, punctured lungs, shattered bones, massive blood loss. By every standard, he should have died. But he didn't. Days passed, then weeks. German intelligence interrogated him. Moran gave them nothing beyond name, rank, and serial number. On December 14, 1943, he was transported east. Destination, Stalag Luft III. Stalag Luft III held 10,000 Allied airmen behind barbed wire and guard towers. Winters dropped below zero. Food was scarce. Red Cross parcels were stolen. Moran's arms healed crooked. His bones fused at unnatural angles. Other prisoners helped him eat, dress, survive. In March 1944, 76 prisoners escaped through a tunnel. 50 were executed. The camp fell silent. Then came January 1945. The guards ordered evacuation. For 47 days, Moran marched west through snow and starvation. Men collapsed and were shot. Others froze to death. His feet became infected. Frostbite ate into flesh. His ribs screamed with every breath. But he kept walking. In April 1945, American artillery grew louder. On April 11th, American soldiers kicked open the doors of a factory in Bitterfeld. Inside lay hundreds of skeletal men. One of them was Eugene Moran. He was alive. Recovery took months. On July 11th, 1945, Moran saw the Statue of Liberty. He was 21 years old. He had fallen 4 miles. He had survived 17 months of captivity. He had walked 600 miles through winter. He came home. Moran married, raised 9 children, worked, lived quietly. Decades later, historians uncovered his story. A street bears his name. A memorial stands in Germany. He never called himself a hero. He said he only did what he had to do. Survive. Come home. Live. Eugene Moran survived the war, but the war never truly left him. Long after the bombs stopped falling and the guns fell silent, his body carried reminders of what he had endured. His forearms, healed at unnatural angles, never fully straightened. Simple movements, lifting tools, tightening bolts, gripping cold metal, caused pain that no one else could see. His feet, damaged by frostbite and infection during the death march, burned constantly, especially in winter. Sleep was never peaceful. Most nights Moran woke suddenly, soaked in sweat, heart pounding, his mind convinced he was falling again. In his dreams, The wind screamed endlessly. The tail section spun. The ground rushed upward. No matter how many years passed, the moment never faded. Aircraft engines froze him in place. Even the sound of a low-flying crop duster could send his body into panic. He never spoke of these moments. He believed that survival meant endurance, not explanation. To the outside world, he was simply a quiet farmer and construction worker. Inside, he carried the sky with him forever. When the war ended, America moved on quickly. New houses were built, families grew, factories expanded. The men who came home were expected to do the same. Moran did. He married Helen. Together they raised 9 children. He worked long days in construction and farming, despite the pain. He never complained. He never asked for special treatment. His medals stayed in a drawer. His story stayed locked inside him. When people asked about the war, he gave short answers. Yes, I flew bombers. Yes, I was shot down. Yes, I was a prisoner. He never mentioned the fall unless someone pressed him. And even then, he spoke softly, without drama, without pride. He did not see himself as a hero. He saw himself as someone who lived when others did not. And that truth weighed heavier than any medal. Decades passed before the world learned what had happened in the sky over Bremen. In the early 2000s, military historians began re-examining 8th Air Force loss records. One report stood out: a B-17 tail gunner who survived after the tail section separated at altitude. The story seemed impossible. Many dismissed it as exaggeration. Then John Armster arrived in Wisconsin. When Armster met Moran, he expected gaps, confusion, fading memories. Instead, he found clarity. Dates, altitudes, aircraft serial numbers. Moran remembered the sound of the flak, the angle of the fall, the way the trees looked as they rushed upward. Armster verified everything. German records confirmed the crash location. Witnesses remembered a tail section falling from the sky. Fragments of aluminum still lay buried in the forest floor. What had once sounded like myth was now undeniable fact. History had missed a miracle. Aviation engineers were asked the same question everyone asked: how did he survive? The answer lay in physics and chance. The B-17's tail section was not small debris. Its vertical stabilizer stood 13 feet tall. Its horizontal stabilizers spanned 43 feet. Together, they formed crude lifting surfaces. The guns, ammunition, and Moran's body were positioned forward, creating balance. The tail did not fall vertically. It glided, spinning slowly, reducing speed from terminal velocity to roughly 70 miles per hour. Then came the trees. The pine forest near Syke was dense and tall. Each branch shattered absorbed energy. The stabilizer catching a trunk changed the angle of descent, bleeding speed further. By the time the wreckage hit the ground, the force, still deadly, had dropped just enough to leave a narrow window for survival. Out of thousands of airmen, only 3 documented cases existed like this. Moran was one of them. Luck, physics, youth, trees, and an unbreakable will to live. Eugene Paul Moran lived until March 23, 2014. He was 90 years old. He lived 69 years longer than anyone expected the moment his aircraft broke apart. He outlived the war. He outlived the men who shot him down. He outlived history's silence. In 2008, his hometown named a street Moran Way. In 2018, Germany erected a memorial at the crash site, honoring all 10 crew members of Rikki Tikki Tavi. Moran's children stood in the same forest where their father had fallen from the sky. He never sought recognition. He never asked to be remembered. But remembrance came anyway, not because he fell 4 miles, not because he survived captivity and a death march, but because he lived after all of it. He married. He worked. He raised a family. He endured. That was Eugene Moran, a farm boy from Wisconsin who fell out of the sky and refused to disappear.